Good evening. How are you? I'm also good. Welcome to the lesson of today. As you can see today, I want us to have a discussion under the early political associations in Kenya up to 1939. And to start with, I would like us to understand one thing that political associations played a major role in the country and also in the continent to awaken Africans so that they can start fighting for their rights. We had the associations that came up to 1939, as you can see in my screen. We had the freedoms who struggled for independence in the country, like in Kenya. The struggle started in 1920 once the country had been declared a British colony. Remember, in 1895, Kenya was declared a British protectorate. That during protectorate, Africans had rights whereby they could conduct and carry out their activities freely in the nation. Then later, in 1920, when Kenya was declared a British colony, Africans said, no, we must stand up and start fighting for our rights. So you can see that the struggle with the formation of associations was aimed to address injustice from the British government and eventually to help or to lead to a self-rule. We had political associations that were formed in the nation up to 1939, and I want us to go through them very quickly. The first one was the Kikuyu Association of 1920. It was formed by a friend, a man that we call Mbiu Koinange of 1920. We had Young Kikuyu Association, which was formed by Harry Thuku. Then later we had the Young Kavirondo Association of 1921. We had the East African Association of 1922, the Kavirondo Taxpayers Welfare Association of 1922, and the Ukambani Member Association Umma, the one that was fighting for the rights on how to reduce livestock keeping in the region. Then we had the Taita Hills Association of 1938. All the above associations except EAA had one thing in common, that is, they were tribal-based political associations. Remember, East African drew members from countries in Africa. Then, all these members were requesting or demanding that we have what you call the abolition of the Kcpe system. And remember, when the white men came into Africa, they took land from Africa. So they were demanding for the return of African land. They were demanding for better working conditions and good salaries. Taxation without a representation in the Legicom. They wanted African members in the Legicom. The forced labor to be forced labor Africans were subject to. So I want us to go through what we call the Young Kikuyu Association of 1921 by Harry Thuku. And the majority of these members were young youths from Kikuyu land. And that's why we say that these political associations, apart from EAA, they were purely tribal. So the Young Kikuyu Association of 1921 by Harry Thuku, we say that it was formed to be more militant, that it can predecessor than its predecessor, the Kikuyu Association of 1920. These members under the Kikuyu Association, they demanded the abolition of the Kcpe system. They also wanted better working conditions for the Africans, return of African land, reduction of the poll taxes that imposed on the Africans. So Harry Thuku realized that the colonial government was not worried about the tribal groups championing tribal affairs. So Harry Thuku came up again in 1922 abandoned a young Kikuyu association to form East African Association that had a nation whole outlook. Now, the EAA had members from Malawi, we had members from Tanzania, members from Uganda. The founder members were John Kang'ethe as the president. We had Jesse Kariuki, James Gishuru, Abdallah Tairal, Morangeto Olesembere, ZK Zentego, MS Ismail, Loman Mboya, Kibwana bin Kombo. The EAA added the following demands. Number one, they demanded that Africans to be free, independence for Africans, free and fair elections in the legislature. Remember, members were being nominated. And after the EAA or the legislature was formed in Kenya in 1906, the Africans fought for their rights up to 1944 when the first African member was recruited as a member in the legislature. So they demanded that we have free elections in the legislature, return of the African land, of course, abolition of the Kcpe and the forced labor, more education opportunities for the Africans in order to compete for the white-collar jobs, better working conditions for Africans. Then from there we had the Kavilondo Taxpayers Welfare Association of 1922. Following were the founder members. We had Jonathan Okwil, the chairperson, and Jolomeo Kaka Okoth George as members of this association. Then we had Simeon Nyande, treasurer, Owol Gomba, secretary, Ezekiel Apindi, Joel Omino, Ruben Omolo. The Kikuyu Taxpayer Welfare Association had the following demands: that Kenya to remain a protectorate and not a colony, exclusion of women from paying taxes, abolition of forced labor. They were against the Kipande system. Africans get title deeds to own land so that they could secure loans. The colonial government reduced hard taxes that Africans were paying and increased wages for Africans, education for all people in the region, cancellation of discriminative laws, and these members were mainly concerned of the African affairs of the workers, the Kikuyu Taxpayer Welfare Association. Later, the Kikuyu Central Association came up in 1924 by the following leaders: Joseph Kang'ethe as the chairperson, Jesse Kamau as the vice chairperson, Johnson Kamau became the secretary general in 1928. Remember, Johnson Kamau is the Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, and we had James Buta. Its members were drawn from Meru, Kikuyu, and Embu communities, whereby they demanded immediate return of the alienated land. Then we had colonial government to allow Africans to grow cash crops, scrapping of the Kipande system, an end of forced labor, that laws to be written in local language so that members can understand, education for the Africans using local languages. And these members, they demanded that Africans to be given equal rights. You can see the roles that they played. The associations presented Africans' grievances in the colonial government. For example, the Kcpe sent Jomo Kenyatta to the colonial secretary to speak on behalf of the Africans. They educated other Africans about the political situation in the country. They also did what they called for the abolition of the Kipande system. They complained about the high taxes in African and the poll taxes. They campaigned for salaries increments. They campaigned against forced labor and demanded for its abolition. They sought to uphold African culture. They wanted the independence back, and they fought for the return of the African land. All these political parties, they were aimed to bring what sanity in the African continent, so that Africans can have what freedom and have their land back. Remember when they came, they disrupted the organization and traditional kingdoms and chiefdoms that were existing in Africa, so that they can have their benefit again. The Africans stood still and they said no. They formed political parties to fight for their industry, for their rights, formed political associations to push for the independence, to push for the return of African land, and Africans to remain being a protectorate and not a colony, so that we can have our own freedom of movement. That's all we had for today. Please let us continue having these lessons and the political sessions and the work that they did in the nation up to 1939. For those few remarks for today, have a blessed night, and please let us meet tomorrow, God willing. Shalom, shalom.